Hi everyone, I'm Emma, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about 5 beliefs that many vegans have about animal rights activism and why these are incorrect. I think the 5th misconception is the most common and the most harmful of these, so stick around to hear that one. Let's go. Misconception number 1 is that there is one type of activism. People often hear vegan or animal rights activism and think of a certain kind of activism. For some it may be disruptive actions, direct action, and for many there is an image of people holding signs and yelling outside or inside of stores or restaurants, yelling at people that they should go vegan. Other people will think of street activism like cubes of truth. I think there's a really important place for all of those types of activism, but it's absolutely the tip of the iceberg, and there are so many other ways of getting involved in animal rights activism. This is something that I'll be exploring in a lot more depth on this channel going forward, so definitely subscribe if you would like to see that and hear from myself, but also people who are involved in forms of activism that I'm not, about all the different ways you can get involved and what that's like. Misconception number 2 is that activism is aggressive. If I don't hear people assume that activism equals a certain kind of activism, I will hear them saying that activism just in general is aggressive and that they don't want to be involved in it because they think being aggressive toward non-vegans makes them not want to become vegan. And in theory, I of course actually agree with that. It's generally not a good thing to be aggressive toward people. It doesn't make them like you. It doesn't make them want to think similarly to you. I always recommend treating everyone with empathy and kindness. But even forms of activism like cubes that many vegans feel apprehensive about getting involved with are actually very non-aggressive. So the way we at Wellington Vegan Actions operate our Make the Connection events is that we just have people holding screens with the footage, and we do it in an area where there's plenty of space, so we're not impeding anybody from going about their business. If they want to just walk by, it's perfectly easy for them to do so. But of course, some people, they do stop and pay attention to what's on the screens, and those are the people that we'll approach and have a chat to. And if at any point they want to stop the conversation and leave, they're just left to do that. Nobody aggressively chases after them or tries to force them to stay and talk to us. And the conversations are generally very conversational. Of course, the odd person can come towards us with a more confrontational manner, but that's not the kind of person that we'd really have a long chat with anyway. If some questions seem to be being asked in bad faith, or the person isn't genuine, or if someone seems to not be at all open-minded and like they're purely just trying to antagonize and bother you, I wouldn't be keen to spend a lot of time with them. There are so many more open-minded, genuine people out there that I think time is much better spent with. And then even beyond this, there are so many other forms of activism that are even less confrontational, if possible, than that. So to just give a really brief intro to some of the really non-aggressive, lovely and kind forms of activism that you can be involved with. There are things like helping run information stalls at local events, so people can come up and ask you questions they may have about veganism, animal rights, or about how to go vegan. They can try vegan foods. Another thing I personally do is act as a vegan mentor for the New Zealand Vegan Society's 21-day challenge. You can also do this internationally through Challenge 22. This is where when people sign up to participate in these Go Vegan, Try Out Being Vegan challenges, they join a Facebook group in which you can mentor them, helping them out with the practical side of going vegan and providing information. This means that you are dealing with people who already have the motivation to go vegan, and hopefully they just need somebody to help them out and increase the chances that they do so successfully and will stick with it. It's also really important to email relevant ministers and members of parliament, people in local government and other positions of authority, and comment on their social media, etc., to put your opinion across on relevant issues. This is something that actually played a really important role recently in New Zealand in getting live animal export to be wound down finally. And I won't go on this point too much longer, but as I said, this is just the beginning of the very non-aggressive ways that you can get involved in animal rights activism. Misconception number 3 is that doing animal rights activism is scary or intimidating. So the great thing about animal rights activism that I have found so far is that because we need so many more activists, which is not so great, it does however mean that your local activism groups are probably going to be super welcoming towards new people joining. I only knew one vegan before getting involved in activism, and I feel so much less isolated in my veganism now than I did before, which is really important because for so many people, the social isolation and lack of like-minded people in your life, that can be one of the hardest parts about being vegan. Not only that, but despite the horrible reality of what we are fighting against and what happens to animals, activism can be pretty fun to be involved in. Usually, after doing some kind of action, we'll go for a meal together, and it's a really great chance to unwind, to chat about what we're doing, share tips, and to get to know new people. Also, I personally am someone who I really struggle to relax, and I often find doing activism oddly relaxing. I stop worrying about all my little personal anxieties, and I'm able to just focus and be present in what I'm doing. When I'm doing a cube and I'm holding one of the signs, I feel so strangely zen. It's almost like a meditative state that I kind of go into, even though the screen I'm holding away from me is obviously displaying horrific footage that I can't see. I just go to this really zen place and I feel so at peace with myself. I'm someone that I've had a lot of mental health struggles in my life, and that's not a way that I often feel, so it's something I love on a personal level about doing activism. Similarly, when I'm doing something like a protest or at the Wellington Animal Rights March last year, I go from this shy person that I can be in my normal life to a person who is shouting about something I passionately believe in and enjoying feeling like even though what we're fighting against is so awful and the scale of the problem is so gigantic, you feel like you're at least taking part in a movement for change, and that gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of community, and it makes it all a little bit easier to deal with. Of course, often people who have a problem with what we're doing will kind of yell things at us, but I've never felt truly threatened by it. There's only been 2 times out of all of the protests and cubes that I've been to where an individual has tried to get physical with an activist, and everything was handled very quickly. The activists were okay, and in general, when people are yelling negative stuff at us, it just rolls off our back. It's quite funny actually, oftentimes. It's something you expect a certain amount of and it's harmless. Misconception number 4 is that there is one particular type of person who does activism. This is something that's definitely not the case. You may get the occasional person who embodies that hippie stereotype. You'll get people who are very leftist in their politics, some people who are more right-leaning, and some who you couldn't even tell that there was anything like alternative about them if it weren't for the fact that you met them at an animal rights protest. I've met people of many different ages, genders, sexual orientations, fitness levels, ethnicities, and interests through doing vegan activism, so it's not the case that you need to worry that you won't fit in because there's such a diverse group of people involved in animal rights activism, and that's such a great and important thing actually for the cause, because most people are more open to having their mind changed and to taking on board what's said to them the more they see themselves as being alike to the person talking to them. If we only have activists from one section of the community or with one kind of lifestyle, then that means our activism will only be ideally calibrated towards people also from that section of the community or also with that lifestyle. And of course, you know, some different groups, depending on the group, they're going to skew more in certain directions politically or in terms of the kind of people that they attract. But you know, the beauty of it is that you can choose to join groups that suit you best. For example, I usually do activism with Wellington Vegan Actions, who are a proudly intersectional group with a kaupapa that is anti-colonialist and pro-trans rights, etc. So unfortunately that's going to be off-putting to some people, whereas a group like Anonymous for the Voiceless is much more kind of come as you are, we don't care whatever other views you may have. While doing this, we are totally focused on the animals, and I think there's a place for both kinds of groups. Misconception number 5, this is the big one, is that animal rights activism is ineffective. It is so common to see people, vegans, reacting to animal rights activism and activists by saying, you're just going to turn people further against veganism by doing this. And it's understandable that people intuitively feel that way because they will have seen non-vegans say that we've all seen comments, you know, like, I'm going to eat twice as much meat now, and this just makes me dislike vegans more, and so on. But we need to try to remember that there's a gulf between what a loud minority of anti-vegans will say or write on social media versus what the real overall and long-term effects of activism truly are. If you look at past social justice movements such as the transatlantic slavery abolition movement, the fight to get women the right to vote, the civil rights movement in the US, you can see that abolition, votes for women, and end to Jim Crow laws, none of these things were achieved without activism. Actually, if we look back to the abolition movement, there were some people who tried to focus on just boycotting slave-produced goods and encouraging others to do the same. But not only was this incredibly difficult to practically do a lot of the time, it wasn't what ultimately changed things. That was formerly enslaved people and abolition activists speaking out or writing about their experiences, educating people on the conditions involved, and making the basic moral case that enslaved people were people who had a right to liberty. When it came to the civil rights movement, you didn't just have people just deciding, you know what, I'm going to stop being blatantly racist, and if I open a business, I'm not going to segregate my customers by race. No, people went into the businesses that were segregating people by race and said, you need to not do that, this is wrong. People went onto the buses and said, we are going to ride this bus sitting side by side with people of another race because that's the way it should be and needs to be. This cannot continue. The actual laws enabling this need to change. These days, everyone admires basically Martin Luther King Jr. and the movement of non-violent resistance and civil disobedience that he was a figurehead for. But if you look back to the time, a huge number of people viewed what civil rights activists were doing as extreme and as something that would potentially make people view black people even more negatively. It was very unpopular with huge segments of the population, but as we've seen, that didn't mean that it didn't ultimately work. So I don't know why we think that with a problem as pervasive as the abuse and exploitation of animals, that we will create the change we want to see by simply being vegan and hoping that without directly challenging anyone for their abuse of animals and making super sure that we don't make anyone at all uncomfortable or annoyed, people will just decide to follow our example. Some people do, and that's great, but we need a lot more people to become vegan a lot faster, and we need systemic change that makes that easier and makes abusing animals harder and less profitable. So what I would really like to know is, did you previously have any of these misconceptions, or are there others you may have, or just any questions in general you have about activism that I should answer in a future video? Let me know in the comments below because I would be really interested to know, and your comments make my day. So thank you for watching, do your best to be kind today, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.